How did a simple boxing club become a president's private army in the heart of Europe? This is the story of Osmanen and Germania. On the surface, they were thugs and extortionists. But in the shadows, they were soldiers. Secret police wiretaps revealed the unthinkable. The gang was taking orders and cash from a politician in the inner circle of Turkish President Erdogan. Their mission: to buy weapons, attack dissidents, and silence anyone who dared to criticize their government on German soil. A gang war transformed into an international spy conflict. This is the story of how an ex-convict built an empire for a foreign power, and how Germany fought back to tear it all down. August 2016. In the German city of Saarbrücken, the night is shattered by the roar of an explosion. A hand grenade has just been thrown at the facade of a shisha bar. Elite German police forces descend on the scene. This is no simple settling of scores. This is a declaration of war. The perpetrators are members of a gang calling themselves Osmanen and Germania, the Ottomans of Germany. And the target was not chosen at random. The bar was a meeting place for their rivals, a Kurdish-rooted gang known as Barhos. The attack was a calculated reprisal, a response to a previous assault where two members of the Ottomans were injured. Within hours, police arrested 21-year-olds on suspicion of attempted murder. Shortly after, the president of the local Ottoman chapter, a 28-year-old man accused of ordering the attack, is taken into custody. The state's response is massive and immediate. Because the German authorities understand what is happening, this is more than a simple turf war for territory and respect. The authorities describe it with chilling clarity. These groups were importing the political conflict between Turks and Kurds into Germany, waging their war with acts of violence on the streets of European cities. The Saarbrücken grenade was a microcosm of a much larger threat. On the surface, it looked like gang crime, but at its core, it was an act of proxy war, a foreign conflict that had arrived to bloody the heart of Europe. This incident raised a terrifying question that would echo through the halls of power in Berlin. Who were the Osmanen and Germania, really? Were they just another gang of thugs in leather jackets? Or were they the vanguard of something much larger, much more organized, and much more sinister? Asterisk: to understand the rise of Osmanen and Germania, it's not enough to look at their crimes. You have to look at the soil they grew from. You have to understand the why. In the early 2010s, Germany was home to the world's largest Turkish diaspora, a community of millions. Their history in the country dated back to the 1960s, when post-war Germany, hungry for labor, invited hundreds of thousands of guest workers, or GASTABEITE. The idea was that they would stay for a few years and then return. But many stayed, started families, and put down roots. For decades, however, Germany resisted defining itself as a country of immigration. This created a painful paradox for the second and third generations. Born and raised in Germany, speaking German, many felt like perpetual foreigners in their own home. This feeling of otherness was not just a perception, it was backed by a harsh reality. Studies from the era showed that young people of Turkish descent faced an unequal education system that limited their opportunities. The community as a whole suffered from social and political discrimination. One survey revealed that young Germans were far less likely to want Turkish neighbors than the other way around, a statistic that reflected a frigid climate of welcome. This constant friction had a psychological cost. Academic research linked perceived discrimination to mental health problems, such as depressive symptoms and chronic stress. This mix of alienation, systemic disadvantage, and psychological distress created what experts call a cognitive opening, a deep crisis of identity and a desperate search for meaning, belonging, and respect. Into this void came an irresistible offer, a group that offered not just power on the streets, but something much deeper, an identity. They called themselves Osmanen and Germania, a name that fused a glorious imperial past with a conflicted German reality. They promised brotherhood, structure, and a code of honor. Their public message was one of social mission. They claimed they wanted to get the kids off the street. For a young man who felt invisible, disrespected, or lost between two cultures, the call of the Ottomans was magnetic. They offered a uniform, a purpose, and above all, respect. They weren't just recruiting members, they were converting young men to a cause. The existence of Osmanen and Germania was not just a criminal phenomenon. It was a symptom of a deeper social fracture, a direct consequence of an identity crisis that German society itself had, in part, helped create. On paper, they were a boxing club. They officially registered as Osmanen and Germania BC, using the BC for boxing club as a legitimate facade. Their founders, an ex-boxer named Mehmet Bagsi, and a former Hells Angels member, Selçuk Kinkahin, claimed to have a social mission, but behind this carefully constructed image, the reality was brutal. From their founding between late 2014 and early 2015, Osmanen and Germania became one of the fastest growing gangs in recent German history. Their real business had nothing to do with sports. It was the full catalogue of organized crime: assault, extortion, forced prostitution, kidnapping, and trafficking in narcotics and weapons. Violence was their primary tool, not only against rivals, but also to maintain iron-fisted internal discipline. A member who tried to leave the group was kidnapped and tortured, a clear message to anyone considering betrayal. Their expansion was explosive and methodical. In a short time, they established between 16 and 22 chapters across Germany and began extending their tentacles into other European countries like Austria, Switzerland, and Sweden. This growth was not organic or spontaneous. Security authorities noted that the club was planned before its official launch and had large sums of money from the start to equip its chapters with logistics, clubhouses, and their corporate identity, like their leather jackets or cotton. This was not a gang that grew from the streets. It was a criminal enterprise launched with a clear strategy. Their operating model was a lethal fusion. They took the intimidating culture and hierarchical structure of biker gangs like the Hells Angels, with whom they forged alliances, and combined it with an expansion model similar to a corporate franchise. The biker culture provided the manpower, loyalty, and intimidation. The franchise model provided the financial and logistical backing for rapid domination. The boxing club was simply the public brand for this criminal corporation, a brand that allowed them to recruit openly while, in the shadows, they built an empire based on fear and violence. What set Osmanen and Germania apart from every other criminal gang in Germany was their darkest and most dangerous secret. They were not working alone. As police investigations deepened, a shocking truth began to surface, transforming an organized crime case into an international spy thriller. German authorities confirmed what many had suspected. The gang had direct connections to the highest levels of the Turkish government. The threads led to the ruling AKP party, its European lobbying organization UETD, the neo-fascist Grey Wolves organization, the Turkish intelligence services MIT, and ultimately, to the inner circle of President Recep Tayyip Erdogan himself. The key player in this conspiracy was a man named Metin Koulank, an AKP parliamentarian and a close confidant of Erdogan. Koulank acted as the gang's handler in Germany. German police, through extensive surveillance, observed him personally delivering envelopes of cash to the Ottoman leader, Mehmet Bagsi. This money, according to wiretaps, was intended for buying weapons and funding political operations. The recordings from German police wiretaps were explicit and chilling. They revealed direct orders from Koulank to gang members. He instructed them to hit the Kurds over the head with sticks, to film the assaults, and to send the videos to Turkey to be used as a deterrent against Erdogan's critics. The agenda was purely political. Koulank ordered the Ottomans to organize protests against the German parliament's resolution recognizing the Armenian genocide. Through an intermediary from the UETD, the AKP's lobby in Europe, the gang was ordered to find and punish German comedian Jan Böhmermann for a satirical poem about Erdogan that had enraged Ankara. Following the threat, Böhmermann was placed under police protection and had to leave the country for weeks. The gang's leader, Mehmet Bagsi, did not hide his mission. In one intercepted call, he boasted to one of Erdogan's top advisors that he would fight on behalf of Turkey against terrorists in Germany. In another, he admitted to having very good contacts with the Turkish intelligence services, the MIT. This was a textbook case of what experts call transnational repression, when a state uses non-state actors to project its power abroad, silencing dissidents, exiles, and diaspora communities. Osmanen in Germania was not simply a gang with political sympathies. They were an unofficial, deniable paramilitary arm of the Turkish state on German soil. The line between organized crime and a state intelligence operation had been completely erased. The threat was no longer just criminal. It was a national and international security crisis. The German state, faced with an unprecedented threat that challenged its sovereignty, responded with overwhelming force. The counteroffensive was not a simple police operation. It was a militarized campaign to dismantle an army in the shadows. The scale of the mobilization was massive. In November 2016, in one of the largest coordinated raids, nearly 1,500 police officers, including elite commandos, simultaneously stormed close to 50 properties across 6 different federal states. They struck again in March 2018, with over 1,000 officers raiding more than 60 properties. The objective was clear: to cut off the head of the snake, seizing weapons, drugs, money, and, above all, gathering evidence to dismantle their structure. To centralize the fight, the state of Baden-Württemberg, one of the epicenters of the gang's activity, created a special unit, the Ermittlungsgruppe Meteor Investigation Group. This task force was not a conventional police unit. It integrated specialists from the Staatsschutz, the State Security Division, because authorities recognized the political dimension of the threat from the very beginning. The EG Meteor was responsible for initiating over 100 separate criminal proceedings against gang members. The tension of this shadow war reached its peak in February 2018. During a raid on an apartment in Wuppertal, German special forces shot and killed Hamit P., a former world president of the Ottomans. According to reports, the gang leader resisted arrest, and the confrontation turned deadly. This incident underscored the real danger and high stakes of the operation. The police were not dealing with common criminals. They were facing men they considered dangerous and who were willing to use violence. The German state's response was proportional to the threat they perceived. They were not dismantling a boxing club. They were fighting a battle to reassert the state's monopoly on violence and political action on its own territory. Operation Meteor was not just a criminal investigation. It was a declaration of sovereignty. The climax of this saga would not take place on the streets, but in a courtroom, but not just any courtroom. For the trial of the Osmanen Germania leaders, the German state chose a location loaded with overwhelming symbolism: the high-security prison of Stammheim in Stuttgart. Stammheim is not a simple courthouse. It is a fortress, a custom-built complex from the 1970s, designed to hold the trials of Germany's most notorious terrorists, the Red Army faction, also known as the Baader-Meinhof gang. By choosing this venue, the German state sent an unmistakable message. The threat posed by Osmanen Germania was being equated with that of the terrorist groups that once tried to bring down the Federal Republic. The atmosphere on the day the trial began, in March 2018, was one of extreme tension. The complex was surrounded by a massive security detail, with hundreds of police, helicopters circling overhead, and exhaustive checks for the public. The courtroom had been reinforced with 2-meter-high bulletproof glass. It was a stage set for a war, not an ordinary trial. In the dock sat 8 of the gang's most important members, including its founders, Mehmet Bagsi and Selçuk Kayhan. The list of charges was a reflection of their brutality: attempted murder, attempted manslaughter, extortion, human trafficking, forced prostitution, deprivation of liberty, and a litany of weapons and drug offenses. The trial was a spectacle, designed to publicly dismantle the myth of the Ottomans and reassert the German rule of law. Evidence was presented of the torture of a defector, of violent attacks to maintain control, and of their vast criminal network. After months of testimony and deliberation, the verdicts came down. The leaders were found guilty. The former head of the Stuttgart chapter was sentenced to 6.5 years in prison, and other high-ranking members received multi-year sentences. Later, Germany's Federal Court of Justice reviewed and upheld the convictions, declaring the trial had been flawless and the sentences were final. The trial at Stammheim was much more than a legal proceeding. It was an act of state. It served the legal purpose of convicting dangerous criminals, but it also served the political purpose of sending a resounding message to the gang's followers and, above all, to their foreign sponsors. The German rule of law would not be challenged. The final blow came on July 10, 2018. German Interior Minister Horst Seehofer announced a nationwide ban on Osmanen and Germania BC. The organization was officially declared a grave danger to individual rights and the general public. The legal basis was Germany's law of associations, which allows for the outlawing of any club whose purpose or activity violates the criminal code. The empire of the Ottomans of Germany had fallen. The organization Osmanen and Germania no longer exists, but the ghosts of what it represented continue to haunt German and European security services. The story is not over. It has simply entered a new phase, quieter, but perhaps just as dangerous. Thank you for staying until the end. Behind every video are hours of research to bring you the complete story. If you value that effort, the best way to support us is by leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. See you in the next investigation.